Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners. First of all, I want to just make sure that I'm live and that my co-hosts and associates can hear me. Can you guys hear me?
We can all hear you.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. We had a little technical issue at the last moment, but I just wanted to make sure everybody can hear me and that we are ready to roll. Thank you for everybody's assistance in that matter. I'm the Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress, Necromancer in the Hands of Nine. Tonight, my gracious on-the-air group and I will be discussing an issue of talismans. This is a very, very broad issue. There are many kinds of talismans and many, many cultures who see them as things that perhaps many other cultures do not see them as. First, I'd like to, as always, introduce the wonderful individuals who come together every Monday night and spend so much time on this project. Chris Ostrowski, my co-host. How are you this evening, Chris?
Oh, not bad. How are you doing, Sorceress?
Good, thank you. And Morgan St. Knight, author, science officer. How are you this evening? Is Morgan hearing me? Do we lose Morgan? Victor, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry, my microphone was muted.
Okay.
But I'm on, Sorceress. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And Victor, how are you this evening?
Thank you for asking. I have recovered from a little bug over the weekend and Friday, but I'm much better tonight, and I thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's been an interesting evening. I want to just make a few comments about talismans before we start. And the fact is that the question of what a talisman is one of those things that is such a broad, broad question, broad idea. It matters on who you talk to. A talisman, in my opinion, is a physical object that represents a particular energy that is derived from a particular desire. And I know that's kind of a broad statement, but the fact is that is really the baseline for what a talisman is. If you talk to people who see sorcery as something disconnected to divinities and deities, as I do, then a talisman is derived from physical objects or images, such as sigils, things of this nature, that come together to represent something. And in the action of coming together, they absorb a certain amount of power or energy, whatever word you're more comfortable with. And that thing then takes on a life of its own, essentially, and has an ability to be reused or revisited or used in an ongoing way. In my work, we use blood for this kind of thing and other objects, but we have a lot to talk about tonight in that area. In other paths, I suppose, one could say that the presence of divinities is apparent in talismans, and that sometimes these works are devoted to those divinities. We have a lot to talk about. But I don't want to start with a long diatribe. I'd like to pass it around a little bit before I get into the kinds of talismans that I'm most comfortable with in my work. Chris, you want to talk about talismans this evening?
Sure. I come across them a lot because of what I do. I find a lot of people, especially when I work around the Amish community, which is overly Christian, I don't see so much on their person, but one of the biggest things that we find in this area, and I mean, people don't look at it as a talisman, but it really is. Hex signs are a big thing. Now, the Amish don't really like that a whole lot. It's more the Mennonite community, but it's associated with them. I mean, people see that when they come to Pennsylvania Dutch country. What they do, they put them on their barns, and they are very intricate, painted circles that have different meanings. And one has two birds, maybe a horse's head, a bunch of connecting lines, things like that, and they represent different things. It could be good luck. It could be for good harvest, prosperity, to protect your barn against lightning strikes, because basically that's where your money is. I mean, that's the most important thing in their farm is the barn. And I say you see that a lot. Matter of fact, 3 Mile Island even has in their warning signs that there's radioactive, that this is a radioactive area and to be careful, has a picture of a distelfink in it.
So you mean the signs that you see on barns, those heavily painted, very lovely. Well, not being from that area, I have at least visited that area, and I could tell you that if that's not a talisman, I don't know what is.
I mean, they won't tell you that. I mean, it's a big thing that, they're just for pretty. Well, if they're just for pretty, how come you put them on there?
I don't think anything in that culture is just for pretty.
No, there is no such thing.
I think it's the nature of the conservativeness of the culture to have things that are all based in some kind of meaning. Victor, do you have any thoughts on this subject about the kinds of hex signs that Chris is talking about?
Well, I just was wondering, Chris, if you could tell us where those hex signs derive from.
There's different stories. Some trace it back to the German paganism, and some they could even go back to the Norse culture. If you look at on my page especially, I have a picture of a hex sign which has what's called the black sun on it, and that is a Norse sign for good luck. So it, like I said, it's different things. It could be the Norse, it could be Teutonic, it could be German. It all within that time frame and that area is when they think they started.
Mm.
Well,
and they don't find any conflict. I'm sorry, they don't find any conflict between what were formerly pagan signs and their Christian religion.
Well, like I said, everybody tells you it's just for show. It's just for pretty. There's nothing, they don't mean anything.
Okay.
Well, I think there's a word for that. I think it's a river in Egypt. So I think that there's a little bit of denial going on there. Magic is magic. Sorcery is sorcery. Talismans are meant to build a visual image or a physical manifestation of an outwardly desired outcome. So what they're doing is really making a statement that there is an understanding and an underlying acceptance of this experience of talismans. But those talismans in particular, though, they border on the work of sigils because they are of a certain nature, a certain two-dimensional kind of presentation most of the time. But yet, the idea of talismans, I think, for most people brings out a more three-dimensional kind of experience, something that one holds in one's hand that has perhaps derivatives from various aspects of the outcome, the desired outcome altogether. There's a photograph representing tonight's show, which is a talisman of mine, and that's a necromancy talisman. And the hair is from someone who's disincarnate, and the red it was originally blood, and then I put something else on it to maintain it, to make sure that it always looked that way. There's a symbol on it. It's on a boar's tooth. It's pretty much an entirely organic item. Even the cord on it is cotton. So everything about that particular talisman is earth-derived or organic-derived or carbon-based. And it's a connection between life and death, and that's what that talisman is used for. So I think that the idea of a talisman is much more so a more complex derivation of items that come together to produce a desired outcome. Morgan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, for me, talismans Yeah, here I am. Sorry,
Okay.
I always mute my mic because we have various bits of insanity going on in my house with 2 cats and that, so I don't want too much extraneous noise in the background. But from my path working, which is primarily voodoo now, talismans take all different forms. I mean, if you go to Southern voodoo and hoodoo, it can be everything from a rabbit's foot, they still use those, to a raccoon penis bone. And it always surprises people to find out that raccoons have a bone in their penis. But yes, this is still used a lot for good luck. And the talismans I make typically don't include those 2 ingredients, but they may include animal teeth. As you use a boar's tooth, I like to use something organic and something from the animal world too. It may be an alligator tooth, for example, is one that I typically use. But our talismans don't so much represent the divine in many cases. What they do is they concentrate a specific energy for a specific purpose. And one thing about our talismans is a lot of times we have to feed them on a weekly or a monthly basis. I typically tell people to feed it if it's a monthly sort of thing. I typically tell them to do it on or around the full moon because that way it's easy for them to remember. Or if it's a weekly basis, to do it, say, on a Friday evening. And how you feed the talisman is different. Some of them include magnetic components such as lodestones, and in that case what you do is you sprinkle iron filings in. Some of them include other components, and you may sprinkle it, say, with whiskey or with rum. And in some cases, I will instruct people to feed it with a drop of their own blood. So there are different ways that we maintain talismans, but for us, we typically do, in voodoo, we have to maintain the talisman. It requires care and upkeep. It's not quite as innocuous as a chia pet. It's more like a real live pet.
You know, when you mentioned putting blood on things, for me, it's a talisman has blood. I'm a blood sorceress. This is what I do, and it has either my blood or the blood of an animal or the blood. And when it's an animal, it's not necessarily a sacrifice, and I'll get into what that's about. Or the blood of a client or the blood of a target, and if it's not blood, it's some other biological. For me, talismans hold a biological. The point of that being, you know, one's hair is attached to something, one's blood, one's some sort of very viable connection between the individual who is named in the talisman, and I'll discuss what I mean by that, and the talisman itself. When I build a talisman, it is named. It's named for someone, whether they're going to receive good benefits from it or they're going to be kept away or they're going to be pushed away or there's some necromancy involved. It's named in some way. Every talisman that I do is that way. And, you know, I always say in my work, you don't need a lot of blood. You need just a little bit. When it comes to talisman, there is an essence of feeding, and maybe not for the same reason, but the same outcome, Morgan, and that is that to refresh the blood or to refresh the biological is to renew the connective energy from the practitioner to the talisman to the target and that whole, you know, ongoing circle. Because a talisman is not necessarily a one-shot deal. It's something that can be carried for a long time, that can go on for a long time. And when I was very young, we used to have, you know, this is a Sicilian thing, and sometimes people say to me, "Oh, I'm Sicilian, that never happened." And I say, "Well, I don't know what to tell you. Talk to, you know, another 100,000 other Sicilian families, and they'll tell you that it did." We would braid the hair of the deceased into jewelry, and this was also a Victorian thing, but this is a Sicilian thing. We had like an earring made out of a suddenly very dark-looking braid, and you would look at it up close, and it, in fact, was human hair. This kind of thing went on all the time, and that's a talisman for an ongoing connection to an individual who has since passed. So these kinds of talismans are pure biologicals as opposed to talismans that have a biological additive. When we do that kind of thing to keep those connections, those are specific connections. If we carry the braided hair of our, say, great aunt with us, then we feed it with our own blood to keep the connection, much as we bait the disincarnate with blood. So for me, there is always a biological base and sometimes a 100% biological base. Morgan, you mentioned, I believe you said alligator teeth. Why alligators?
Because alligators are very strong and they're also very defensive. When I use alligator teeth, I typically put them in for defensive talismans and protection talismans. If I'm going to put an animal bone in, I want it to be a strong animal, one that's associated with fierceness and territorial activity. Alligators are very common down here in the South where I am, and it's very easy to find alligator teeth simply because people hunt these things, and they're available everywhere, online and souvenir shops. Not so much here in Atlanta. We don't have too much of a gator problem up here, but we do. But if you get into South Carolina and that, and I go to South Carolina a few times a year, they're considered pests. So they kill the gators to get them, to keep the public safe, and then they go ahead and harvest the teeth. So for me, it's also a thing that at least we're using something from this animal that died, even though we were encroaching on its environment. It probably didn't have to die, but was done so because of the human viewpoint of what was needed for human safety. And at least in this way, I'm honoring a little bit of the sacrifice that the animal made.
So when it comes to animal portions in a talisman, for me, there has to have, like you were saying, an alligator is a strong animal, so you would use that. For me, there has to have a viable connection to the true essence of the animal and the meaning of the talisman. For example, I would not use a tooth if I was trying to get somebody to create a talisman for somebody who needs to escape from something. I would use aviary bones. I would use bones that would be associated to flight or escape. So I completely appreciate what you're saying. If I wanted to, create a talisman where something could be attacked by something or grabbed by something, then an alligator tooth would be a good idea. So these kinds of connections are very powerful. For me, in blood sorcery, these things are not connected to divinities, but they are connected to that understanding of the gut reaction that one has when one sees something like an alligator's tooth or a long aviary bone, this kind of thing. So let me ask you this: is there a necessary, in your experience, and I have my own thoughts on this, and I'm sure we all will, is there a necessary visual impact that is required from a talisman, or is it purely what we put into it and the collective energy? Anybody want to take that?
Well, I think some of it has to do with the appearance. I mean, because you have to, we all agreed on the fact that people need to see something in order to believe in it most of the time. So you have to have something that somebody's going to believe is powerful. If you just hand them something that, like a bag that has nothing in it or whatever, they're not going to believe that it's going to do anything. That's just the way people are. Now, the way we know is that it's our energy, it's their energy, whatever we put into it that makes that powerful. So I think it's kind of a mixture of both. In order, we know it's going to work, but we have to convince the people that we're doing it for, if it's not our own, that it's going to work.
Well, my clients don't always see the talisman. Sometimes I will make a talisman and use it on their behalf. So I think that when you are dealing with third party and people who don't understand the work, the visual stimulation is important. When you're dealing with third party who will not see the work, the visualization and the stimulation is not important, but the content is the entire push when the client is not involved in putting energy into the process. Morgan, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a lot of times, in fact, most of the time, when I'm making a talisman for people, I will actually make it right in front of them as part of a larger overall thing, a larger overall working for them. That may include lighting candles or doing whatever else is necessary to help them. And in this way, they get to see what goes in the bag, because most of my talismans are the traditional gree-gree, which we call talismans within bags. They're usually red flannel bags. I've used different cloths in different colors for different purposes, but I want the client to see what's going in so that they know what's in there. And I typically will, at the beginning, before we start the actual ceremony, I will explain to them, I'll lay everything out, and I will explain to them what it's for and why it's going into the bag. So I agree totally that there is a visual component, and I totally agree with Chris that people do need to see something. You can't just hand them something that they can't really get into and see and say, here, just believe it'll work, because most of the time they won't. Only in rare cases, when I've worked with a person a few times and they've grown to trust me, might I make them a talisman in a ceremony outside their presence and then give it to them at a later date if it's not convenient for them to be there for the actual ceremony. And then that level of trust has already been built up, and they know that I'm not just handing them an empty bag or a bag that's stuffed full of cotton balls or something.
I find this all very interesting because my clients are all, I have a lot of clients everywhere. I have a global, sort of a global group of clients now. They rarely see me in person. And I would say more than 70% of my work is done remotely. I have clients in Japan and in the UK and all over the place. So they rarely see my work. For me, talismans also must include some iron and some magnets because I work them with directional sorcery. And sometimes they ask to see a photo, sometimes they don't. Well, most of the time the work is sitting in my presence on my altar. Sometimes I'll send the talisman to them if they want it, but that is less likely than for them to have it. My clients tend to be people who just want to call and say, could you just fix this? So it's a very interesting difference between the way that we're approaching this thing. They never know what's in it unless I ask them for their own biologicals, which sometimes I do, if it is required for the work. But my clients hardly ever see the actual talisman. Many of them don't want to. They just want to know that it's going to work and be part of it. And then, in the long run, we have to discuss what you do with talismans when you don't want them anymore. Victor, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a question. I've actually never created one myself. I've acquired them, made by others. I've never made one. I understand the importance of the intention being put into the talisman as you're making it, the energy for the purpose, for the outcome. But do you ever give talismans names?
Yeah, well, I do. I give them names sometimes because the talisman for me is almost an effigy. And I will name it either the name of its target, or I can name it the intention, and that is for me more of an idea of directing the energy by the language of my voice. I use my voice quite a bit in my work, and I will sit, for example, with a talisman. Say somebody wants to conceive, and they have not been able to do that any other way, and they come to me for a talisman. And I build a talisman, and it could be made from a lot of different things, mattering on why they're not conceiving or what I perceive from the client. So it isn't a black and white issue. This is this formula. This is this formula. It doesn't work that way. But I will work with them and their blood and magnets and all manner of things and create this thing. And I will sometimes, for example, say baby, and I will say this is what this is for. This is to deliver a full-term, healthy, living human into the arms of these people and call it baby. And then sometimes I will be very specific. Somebody I know who's dealing with an ongoing dis-ease, for which we have done some talismanic work. I will name the talisman to do what it's supposed to do, like, for example, bone strength, and create the talisman and call it that. And I don't say it is for bone strength, because for me the talisman is now the answer to the problem. So if I'm holding it in my hand, it is bone strength. Does that help at all, Victor?
It does. I'm curious as to whether Chris or Morgan named their talisman.
It all depends on what I do. A lot of times, I'm comfortable using runes when I make things. So generally, when I put the rune on it, that's basically the name of what it is, because you write the rune on it, then you have to enchant the rune, and all the runes have names. So I don't cause a conflict. That's pretty much what it is. If it's something for strength, it's going to be called Uruz, which is the rune for strength, and that's where I leave it. I mean, it's not like I use a different kind of name for it. That's easier for the people to remember too if I'm handing it to somebody.
Oh, so you're focusing. I'm sorry, just one comment. So you're utilizing the sort of pull from the ancient.
Right.
That makes sense. Morgan, what were we saying?
Oh yeah. Generally, for me, the talisman has a purpose, and that's specifically what I'm making it for. I don't name them. There are occasionally times when we do something called tying a point, which means you directly link a talisman to a specific Orisha or a specific Lawa. These are the spirits that are considered the intermediaries between the creator and humans in voodoo and Santeria. And we called it tying the point by it directly connects the talisman to them. I don't do that work an awful lot, but in that case, the talisman would actually not really be named after the specific spirit, but it would be connected with them so that you would think of that spirit. And that's about the closest I come to doing anything such as naming.
So, do you ever work talismans without connections to the divinity?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Most of the ones I do not have connections to the divinity. I think there are some practitioners who would say that every time you do work and every time you allow that energy to flow through you, you are in essence using or linking it to the divinity because it's the energy that's a larger part of the universe that they consider to be a manifestation of the divinity. But for practical purposes, I don't consider it to be linked to a specific divinity. It's the energy that I'm putting into it, and also the energy that the client is putting into it, because I expect this to be an interactive experience. I've had horrible experiences with, I expect horrible experiences with people who just take this thing from me and they throw it in their glove compartment, in their sock drawer. They never look at it. They never touch it. They just expect it to work its magic. But I expect them to be highly involved with it, to handle it, to talk to it sometimes if that's what they need to do, and to focus on it.
So when you build a talisman, you're expecting this long-term participation.
I am.
With the client.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is not my experience.
I'm expecting them to do the participation on their part. I don't expect to have to keep interacting with them.
That is not my experience. For me, when I build a talisman, it's like a little soldier that's going out to do its gig and to continue doing its job. And my clients, some of which are very involved in sorcery and want to be part of it, and some of which are just absolutely not. People come to me and they say things to me like, I have no belief in what you do. Somebody told me they had success with you, so I need you to do this for me. And that is the interaction, and then it's done. So for me, talismans are very much, they are often the messenger that I send. And when the client does want it, which some do and some don't, and I think we have a very different kind of clientele, they do little to nothing with it unless they are people interested in sorcery. I build it to expect it to be, like the Egyptians had the Ushabti. They go out and they do their bidding in the afterlife. It's more that kind of a thing for me. They get this thing sometimes. Sometimes they don't want it at all. And do you ever have that experience where somebody does not want this in their house?
Well, if they're not comfortable having a talisman, then I find another way to work. I try to do an extensive interview with the person beforehand, because I do understand there are some people who don't want it, and it could be for a number of reasons. They may be living with other people who simply don't share the beliefs or would be horrified to see something like that in the house. And I think that's a big concern for some of the people that I see. But most of the time, if they don't want something physical, then I can find a workaround for them.
Religions have lots and lots of items that I refer to as talisman. And I find it interesting that they don't. All the various icons, all the jewelry, all of this kind of thing. Do talismans, in this group's opinion, exist that way? I mean, is a crucifix a talisman?
Sure it is.
What do you think about that, Chris?
Of course, they put it on. It's part of their. They're empowering it with their beliefs. I mean, to look at it, it's just a piece of gold and silver, stainless steel, whatever it's made out of. But when they wear it, they put power into that they believe it's going to do something. It's going to protect them. It's going to keep them from getting sick, whatever. And that's no different than basically what we do. I mean, we take something that, if you take the components of it, are really nothing. I mean, you take a boar's tooth here, you take a little bit of hair, take some of this, and we throw the thing together, and we imbue it with power. That's how it works. Well, they do the same thing with a crucifix. I mean, a priest holds it in his hand and does a blessing over it, and now it's supposed to be the most greatest thing in the world, stop bullets and stop hurricanes and whatever the hell else it's supposed to do. But it's basically the same thing.
Well, I think that books and scrolls and all sorts of things can be talisman in that sense.
Sure. Anything that you look at, and I mean, I could pick up a pen and go, this pen is going to save my life, and I'm saying, I'm going to empower this by the name of, Bubba the Flying Squirrel, whatever the hell, and
will you make me a Bubba the Flying Squirrel talisman?
Yes.
You promise?
I'll get it ready now. You know what I mean.
No, and the reason that I'm saying that, other than in jest, is that could actually be something that you make. And we were talking before about naming things. And, what is the difference? If you were trying to give somebody, a sense of humor, or if you're trying to help them with their levity, or you're trying to even help them with their ability to escape, and that was a term that they could address and understand, then it's a great idea. I jumped in there to say that because talismans and the names of them and what they are, I mean, it could be anything. There are no rules except that you put something together that represents what it is that you're trying to do. And in each of our different ways, we have, different things that we add and things that we wouldn't think about adding. Victor, what came to mind for me is the mezuzah.
Well, I was going to say that the mezuzah and also the Shield of David, or what some people call the Star of David, you talked about the visual impact, and I think some of the more iconic shapes, geometric shapes that are used in talisman are something that may have an effect on people on different levels just by visualizing them or seeing them. Starting off with what we would call the pentagram or the hexagram. And the hexagram as the Shield of David. The interesting thing about this, a lot of people call it the Star of David, but the actual translation from Hebrew, Magen David, is the Shield of David rather than the Star of David. And it's also been incorporated into what people know as the Seal of Solomon. The fascinating thing is that you really don't see anything in terms of historical literature about these forms until the early 11 and 1200s. So it's something that really was not in historical texts in terms of Judaism. And in fact, these forms, the hexagram in particular, the six-pointed star, or the two equilateral triangles interlaced, is something that goes back thousands of years into the Hindu and the Sanskrit literature and materials. So this is something that's been universal in not just Judaism, but going back into Hinduism, going back into, I don't know whether they're found in Sumer or not, in the Sumerian text, but they're definitely found in the Hindu. And what we deal with here is what you're looking at is two interlaced equilateral triangles in terms of the Magen David, the Shield of David. And so what does it represent? To some people it represents the power of the interlocking of the combination of heaven and earth, as above, so below, the microcosm and the macrocosm, all of these symbols. So the visual impact is very important. What's interesting is how the Nazis in the 30s and the 40s used it to identify people as Jews and put the word Judah in the center of it when they put people into concentration camps, or prior to putting them in concentration camps, where it was sewn onto clothing so that people could be identified as Jews. So the use of it, from very powerful in terms of some of the mystical and spiritual, the Kabbalistic practices, going to the modern day and how it's used and interpreted is very powerful in terms of the shape and size. In the Hindu, you'll see the 6-pointed star with the crux anastasa. I can't pronounce it, but it looks like the swastika, but it's not a swastika. It's not the German swastika, but the swastika from the ancient Hindus. You had mentioned the mezuzah.
Yes.
Mezuzah is used to put on a doorway, on a gatepost, an entrance of specifically observant Jewish homes, and what it does is it contains a portion of the Torah in it. And what it's used for, interestingly enough, is that when someone enters the home, they're supposed to leave behind the day's thoughts, anything that is worldly and secular, and recognize that when they walk into home, they're walking into a divine or a holy or a sacred place, leaving behind that which is not sacred and holy and entering into that which is sacred and holy. So that has a lot of power to it for Orthodox Jews, that it's this cleansing point, this release point, which is very freeing. And you had mentioned, you had talked a little bit about, or you had texted me about tefillin. Tefillin, or in the Greek, the phylacteries, is, for those who are not familiar with that, if you've ever seen a picture of an Orthodox Jew wearing what looks like a square device with leather thongs on top of the center of the forehead, just above what would be the third eye, and also on the left arm with leather straps wrapped on the third arm. This is a sacrament in Orthodox Judaism from the time that a boy is bar mitzvahed until his death. That you're supposed to wrap. It's called wrapping or laying tefillin on a daily basis. And again, this connects.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. This connects to this whole concept. Where this comes from is a prayer in which it says, "You will take my words which I give you this day, and you will put them on your doorposts and your gateposts. You will put them next to your heart and next to your head, as a remembrance of my commandments that I give you this day." It was delivered to Moses that way. And that's exactly what this is. It's a ritual reenactment of the laws as being received by Moses, and then being committed to the psyche, to the heart, to the home.
The reason that mezuzah, and thank you for that, because that was probably the best explanation of those two items that I've heard. The reason that the mezuzah and the putting on the tefillin are interesting to me is because they contain scrolls that, in the best case scenario, are handwritten.
Yes.
It's not the item that it encases it, the beautiful sculpture or glass or whatever you have on that's holding it to the doorway. It's the sculpt. It's the idea that words are printed inside of it, and this to me is what makes it a talisman. And when you walk in, you kiss your hand and you put it on the mezuzah. This I know from my Orthodox Jewish friends. So my experience of that is I say to them, "How is this not a talisman?" They don't like the word, and to me it is. Anything that contains the item that is the more powerful aspect of the thing is what's necessary to make a talisman roadworthy, if you will. It's very much like Morgan's talking about the gree bags. It's very much about what happens when I roll blood and magnets and iron into parchment and make it, look like some sort of tube containing these items that are sealed in particular ways, sometimes with wax, sometimes with other things, sometimes with, things I wouldn't even mention at this moment in time because those things would be personal. I do many talismans made from people's menstrual blood that is sent to me, or we sit together and it's dried and they hand it to me and I work with that. It's not a particularly it's a delicate thing, let's just say. It's not a lightweight thing. It's when we use blood in this way. I had a client who came to me and said that she was desperate to conceive, and I said, well, what do you have? What sort of biologicals do you think you could bring into this process? And she sat there for a while and said, well, of course I could give you blood, or I could do. She said, oh, wait a minute, or I can give you some placenta from my sister who has 9 children. I said, yeah, let's use that one. It was just so startling to me that this came into her mind, a few minutes later. And I said to her, why do you have placenta from, one of your sister's birth. So I'm curious as to what that means. And she says, oh, she gave it to me for good luck because she knew I was trying to have a baby. So people bring all manner of things to the table when it comes to the building of these talismans, especially clients who want things that they understand to be attached to biologicals. I think that is something that is very important here. Morgan, you had mentioned the word believe, and that people, you want them to see what's in it because they can't just believe that. I mean, not that you would hand somebody an empty bag unless that is the talisman itself, which is possible. What does believe mean when it comes to these things? 'Cause this is a concept that I always have to push on a little bit.
As far as the talismans are concerned, the people have to be convinced that it's going to work. That's what my assessment is. And let me be clear. For me, it will work whether they believe in it or not. But the whole point for me is not just to get the job done, but in the interim, because there's often a time lag between the time I give them something and the time they accomplish what they want to have. I want them to be as comfortable with it as possible. So if in that frame of mind they need to have a sense that, yes, this is really working, that's fine. I don't want them to walk away from me with doubts because that just leaves them uncomfortable. I myself don't have doubts that it will work. I have a very low non-success rate. Most of the time it is almost always a hit. But, just for the person's peace of mind, that's a big part of it for me. I really want to make sure that they are comfortable and that the minute they take that in their hands, that they have some sense of, yes, this is going to be done. Because even if it is ultimately done, if they have to wait 3 or 4 days before they see results, that's 3 or 4 days when they may be agonizing, and why put someone through that?
Well, the whole point of sorcery, generally speaking, is for it to work in real time. And real time, very much like when we use directional sorcery, when we face west, is the real time that's appropriate for the situation. If one wants to conceive and you're sitting there together, it's obviously not going to happen in that moment. Time has to pass and other activities must occur one way or the other, and then therefore the experience develops and happens into what they want it to happen as. So when we talk about, when I hear the word believe, and I thank you for clearing that up because that was interesting to me. Often clients will say to me, I don't really believe in any of this, but I know other people who have come to you and have had success. So I ask them at that moment to do me a favor and not believe in it and just be part of it and observe it. Because talismans specifically because they are a combination of, for me, mostly carbon-based things and biologicals and some metals and magnets, that there is no issue about believing. They can participate in this by giving me what is helpful for me to have. For example, their biologicals or photos or whatever. And then they can sit back and watch. Often I find that they are quite startled by how quickly things happen when we build a talisman. But it's the energy of the building. It's similar to the idea that when one is harvesting blood, as we did last week on the show, then it's the incision, it's the puncturing, it's the injuring of the vessel that brings the blood forth that makes this particular activity so powerful. Is it the building of the talisman, or is it the handing over of the talisman? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that.
Well, for me, it's both. It's the build for them from their standpoint. Watching me build it, I think, gives them a sense of participation and a sense of understanding what's going on, which again helps ease their comfort level. And then the actual handing over, I always consider that to be a little bit of an energy exchange, actually a lot of an energy exchange, and a very significant part of it. Because at that point in time, I'm basically saying, I'm giving you a tool, but it's up to you to actually use it to change your destiny. If this is what you really want, you must use this tool to change your destiny.
I see. Victor, do you have any thoughts about, going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, do you have any thoughts on the handing off of these things or or the viability of these things, the position of someone handing them to somebody else, the giving of these things, because I know in some of the things we were talking about in the mezuzah, someone's supposed to give it to you, and to fill in is like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I just wanted to share that, as we've discussed before, my grandfather was an Orthodox Jew. I am non-practicing. I have my own belief systems. But I have my grandfather's tefillin, and to this day, if I take them out and hold them in my hands, I feel a tremendous amount of energy. I feel a connection to that time as a young boy that I was with him, and he would teach me things. And it's very meaningful to me. It's very what's the word I'm looking for? If I'm feeling off, if I'm feeling out of balance, if I take these things out and hold them in my hands, and just allow their energy to permeate me, it's very balancing, grounding, and brings me back to center. Very, very powerful. And I just wanted to give the reference. The reference that this comes from is all from Deuteronomy. And it's Deuteronomy chapter 6 and then also 11. And it says, "The words that I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall speak of them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them down on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So that's the actual biblical reference from Deuteronomy in terms of the tefillin. And one other thing, when I was a kid, and I used to see my grandfather put these on during his morning prayers, I almost had a sense that he was putting on some type of a radio. And you got to remember, this is the 50s, and I was very, very radio-oriented in the 50s. And to see that mounted between his head, even though I wasn't familiar with the third eye or the concept of the third eye or any of that in those days, to see him put that on his head, it was almost as if, in my mind, he was putting on some kind of a radio. Just an interesting observation from when I was a child.
This idea of a radio, very interesting to me. And I think the word that I would use describing what you go through when you pick them up is correction. And I use this term a lot with clients or with students, this idea of correction, that an item that you're holding corrects your energy. And by corrects, I don't mean that it was previously wrong. I mean that it was previously not working for you. When I deal with boar's teeth, generally speaking, I get that sense of correction. I have a number of items like that correct me, that bring me back to an energy that makes sense in the moment. And I think that the idea that there is previous history in those items make them, in a sense, even more likely to be able to create a correction for you because they come with history and antiquity. So I think that has a lot to do with talismans. Talismans, unlike pieces of jewelry that are sort of random and cold and off the production line, come with them. They bring with them their own ancestry, not necessarily an ancestor, but they bring an ancestry with them, because the act of creating a talisman is so vital. Like I was talking about before, it's similar to the harvesting of blood. And on top of that, I say that if you've made many, many, many talismans, then each one that you do is feeding off the energy of the fact that you've made others. There is a collective collaboration in that energy. Chris, what do you think about people who come into this work and are sort of new to it and trying to grasp what it means to assemble talismans? I mean, they come to this work and they think about runes and they think about old world materials and they're trying to put it together. Is there new energy useful, or is it scattered? What do you think about that?
I think it all depends on their intent and how focused they are. If they're not sure about what they're doing, and they're just randomly putting things together without a plan or any kind of direction, it's just like making a cake and not measuring anything. It's either going to turn out wonderful or it's going to turn out, like a hockey puck.
What about their intention, though? And by which I mean if they really feel a connection to objects. What I'm asking, the bigger question that I'm asking is there a recipe book in your world?
Sure there is. Yeah, everything. everything you do has a recipe. If you're putting something together, you have components that you're putting together. Just like the picture that we have for this show, you have a boar's tooth, you have blood, you have hair, you have a leather thong. These are all components, and they're all part of a recipe. No different than flour, sugar, water, oil. It's all the same thing, and you are cooking or baking a talisman. You have to have a little bit more than just intention. I mean, intention gets you so far, and if you don't do it right, I mean, I can sit here and make a potion that I intend it to heal you, but if I ain't careful with what I do and I put skullcap in there, it'll heal you all right. You won't feel anything again forever.
That's true. I want to ask Morgan to bring the science to the table, and then I want to talk about using items of the dead in talismans. Morgan, science officer, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, tonight I want to talk about something called the Curie point, or the Curie temperature.
Yes.
And this refers to the temperature at which an object which is ferromagnetic loses its capability to hold a sustained organized magnetic field. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be magnetized or it doesn't respond to outside magnetic sources. If you put a powerful magnet near it, the components will line up with that source, but as soon as you take it away, the substance will not retain that field, will not retain that alignment as it normally would. And this is all a temperature thing. For iron, the Curie point is about 1,400 degrees. If it gets to that point, it no longer will hold a sustained magnetic field. And it's proved to be very useful in studying the Earth's geomagnetic history now that we know about the Curie point. We know that the Earth's poles have flipped several times in the past, and there was a lot of talk about that during the whole 2012 uproar, fear that the Earth's magnetic field would flip and civilization would crumble. And here we are, nearly 2 years later, we seem to be just fine. But the Earth's magnetic field actually does flip at times. The North Pole becomes the South, vice versa. And through the Curie point, we can pinpoint when this has happened in the past. We do this by studying different layers of sedimentary rock taken from certain mountains, but we can also do it from core samples taken from the ocean floor. The reason this works is because of the way the ocean floor is created. It's generated from large fissures which exude magma. The magma is very, very hot. It's well over the Curie temperature for any ferromagnetic components in it. And when the magma hits the water, it begins to cool, and as soon as it dips below the Curie point, the ferromagnetic components line up with the prevailing orientation of the Earth's magnetic field. And that stays fixed. So if it is cooled at 250 million years ago, even if the poles flip after that, still that magma that cooled 250 million years ago will retain the orientation of the field as it was when it hit the Curie point. And how does this relate to talismans? Well, when a talisman is being constructed, this is how I view it, during the construction, it's in a flux state. It has the potential to go in a lot of directions, many directions at the same time. And that kind of mix of energy orientations would be called paramagnetism if we were talking about a ferromagnetic material. But at a certain point, it's ready to align with the prevailing energy orientation, and that's the point where the will of the sorcerer, the will of the practitioner takes over, and that's when the specific orientation of the talisman is set and fixed forever. And then the talisman itself becomes an aligning tool. So that if you're in a situation that's in flux, times where there are many possible outcomes, and you want to ensure a specific outcome, you can use the talisman to enforce the desired alignment. And sometimes the situation, maybe it appears set in stone, but that's when you can use other methods of sorcery to put the situation in flux briefly, to basically send it in that disorganized state of paramagnetism just above its symbolic Curie point. And then you use the talisman as a focusing tool. You can then realign the situation to your desired outcome.
Now, aren't we always doing that? We don't have to know the numbers. We don't, and thank you for that. That was fantastic, and 1,000 things went on in my head when you were talking about it. But aren't we always doing that? I mean, in the science of sorcery, the interesting thing about it is very much like when one is in a laboratory and they are combining 6 elements, and they combine them, and either the beaker overflows or the color changes or whatever happens. You don't have to know why. You don't have to know the molecular structure. You just have to know that it works. And I think that when we do sorcery on our talismans, and I want to talk about what I mean by that, then we are not necessarily knowing the Curie point, but we are accessing it by asking an item to transform in a way, to change from one thing to another and be part of a transition. When we do the iron ring, we push everything out to the end, and that very edge surface is where we're working. That's what our Curie point is for the work itself. Before we go on, I want to, we have another almost hour. I'd like our listeners to go grab a penny and have it in their hand, because in a little bit of time I want to do some energy work, and I would like to focus on that one object that everybody can find and have in their hand, in a U.S. penny. So, please do that, and in a little bit of time I'll tell you why I asked you to do that. Anybody have thoughts on what Morgan was saying on the science of the thing?
Just on a very practical basis, the industrial magnets that I sent you some samples of, Sorceress, and which our company sells, these are used in welding applications. And what's interesting is that they have to be reinforced so as not to be affected by heat from the welding arc, because we're using a magnet to hold 2 pieces of steel together for the purpose of welding. And in order to prevent them from losing their magnetic permeability, they're reinforced with substances which take the heat from the weld and actually take it away from the actual weldment, take away from the magnet, rather. So it's just a practical application of what he was talking about.
I use those magnets a lot, and let me talk for a minute about how amazing they are. Victor sent me magnets that reverse polarity by the turn of a screw, essentially, a little knob on the top. I use those magnets in many ways, and in building of talismans, I use them a lot. Sometimes I will create a circle of them and put the polarity in one particular direction, build the talisman in that circle, and I mean a circle on a tabletop, and then change the polarity and allow the energy of the talisman to release. And I find this to be a very effective tool. Very useful, very concrete for me, for my understanding of where the triggers are and what has to move, and as a send-off point. So, Victor, as soon as you started talking about magnets, you had my attention. Not that you don't all the time, anyway. The idea of giant industrial magnets is, to me, absolute sorcery porn. How big do these things come? How?
They're up to the capability. They have them big enough to handle 5,000 pounds of pull.
Wow, I can't even imagine how amazing that would be. How big of a magnet is that? Is it about...
Physical dimension of a 5,000 pounder is about 6 inches across by about 18 inches long.
This is a very good thing. And are they reverse polarity? Do they pick things up and you reverse them and they let them go? Is that what it's used for?
That they're all, yes. The design is you have 2 what they call rare earth neodymium magnets, and they're and what happens is one of them is fixed and the other one is movable. And when you use the switch or the little knob that you have on yours, or the large lever that you use for the larger models, what you're doing is you're just moving the phase so that they're aligned, so that the magnet is turned on. The permeability of the magnetic field is generated. And when you turn it the opposite way, the magnetic field is turned off. And these are things that are used for lifting large, heavy sheets of steel in foundries and factories.
So, have you seen activity around these magnets? And I know that this is a show about talisman, but I find it very interesting the way that things perform around magnets. Have you seen things perform in unusual ways around magnets?
I've seen industrial applications that are strange around magnetic fields. For example, in the welding process, if you have a welding cable If it's straight, it welds well. If you put it into a coil, it creates an inductance, which creates a situation known as arc blow, where the actual welding arc or the welding fire wavers as opposed to being steady. And that's something that people have to avoid by not having the welding cables coiled up.
Is there any use for that?
Inductance? Oh, yeah. Inductance is used to create heating.
No, is there any use for having it coiled up? Is there any use in industry for not having a straight arc?
No, not in the welding application. No. But having it coiled, having large magnets large cables carrying high levels of current can be used to induce heat. Where you have to heat something up prior to working with it or welding it, and you'll wrap the metal with special cables that are designed for that. It's called inductance heating or induction heating.
So when I make a talisman and I use magnets around it and I reverse the polarity and let it go, essentially let the energy go that I was trying to hold in with the magnets, what am I doing there? I wonder sometimes, and I understand, striking the target is something I understand. I wrote the book on it, and what it is there's an idea, thought, idea, or intention that I have, and it has physical weight. We push against it and send it to where we want to go. That is the extremely oversimplified version of it, but that's what we're talking about. When it comes to talisman, there's two positions on this thing. There is not just an idea that we're shooting out like we do with the iron ring and we do with directional sorcery, but one has to first embed the object with the thing that needs to be sent out, with the message. And this is what makes talismans very different from sigils, and I wanted to mention this. When we make sigils to trigger our own thoughts, ideas, and intentions based on the shapes that we're seeing, whether they are Norse sigils, whether they are a modernized version of my iron ring sigils, where the self is introduced by a line and two dots, this kind of thing. It doesn't really matter, but what we're doing is triggering ourselves. With talisman, it's the opposite. With talisman, we're taking the triggers that we have or understand or know, such as the use of blood or the use of in my case, iron and magnets and plant objects and botanicals, whatever it is that we use, whatever goes in the mix. And those things are pulled from our internal trigger library and brought together to interact with one another. This is the moment I want to talk about. Because unlike sigils, where the symbols are there to sort of tease our mind into understanding the energy that's necessary and that we have to hone into, the idea of talismans means that these things have energy which will react off one another, which is why I asked Chris the question about people who come to this that are new to it. People say all the time, well, I got some sage and I smudged my house because that's the way to get the demons out and to make it clean. And I say to them, well, unless you have the heritage that comes with that or how to use it, few people actually know how to use it. So when we bring these items together, the items themselves have a particular vibration, if you will, a particular energy, a particular signature that has to meet up with other things. Chris, you mentioned skullcap. There are a lot of things you don't put together. And in my case, that is often different types of biologicals or different various people's blood, or you don't put this bone with that bone when I'm using those kinds of biologicals that are animal, not attached to human bodies. So what happens in that moment when it all comes together? Chris, Morgan, anybody? Hello? Am I off the air?
No, you're still there.
Oh, was that a bit much?
I wanted to make sure that Chris had a chance to speak up because we haven't heard a lot from him this hour, so I want to make sure he gets in. Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, yeah.
Chris, you want to jump in?
Well, the way I look at it, when you're done with everything and you're putting it together and you're at the last stages, I think it still comes down to the practitioner to put their little finishing touch on it. It's your energy that's going to power the thing to begin with. So no matter what you do, it's going to come down to that. It's going to come down to your abilities and what you put into it. Everything else is pretty much just an item. You
don't think that the item has? You don't think the item has a vibration or a continuous energy output that attaches it to something else in the process, like in a gree bag or in the kind of talismans that I do?
Well, let's go back to what I said about a recipe, okay?
Okay, yeah.
You throw everything together, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to do something with it. You have to bake it, and you putting the final touch on it with your energy or whatever you're using, that is the baking process. That is the final thing that makes everything else work. Just like you can have a gun, you can have a shell, you can have a casing, and you can have gunpowder. If you don't put them all together, it's not going to work. And you still need that final bit of blasting powder or a blasting cap at the end for everything to go off the way it's supposed to. And I think that we are that final piece. I
see.
If you put all that together and you just hand it to somebody, it's not going to do anything.
So it's the intention of combination. It's the intention of the work. It's the intention of attachment to these things. And I know that Morgan wants to say something. And hold that thought for 1 second, Morgan. My comment to you, Chris, is what this reminds me of. Your statement is so true about us being the final energy, the final plug-in. When you go into a New Age shop and there's a bag sitting on the shelf that's been there forever, that has this or that in it, and it's going to change your whole life if you buy it according to what it says. It's going to bring you wealth, or it's going to bring you a lover, or it's going to bring you a new job, and you take it off the shelf and you pay your $10 and when you put it in the bag and you bring it home and nothing happens. And, people come to me all the time having had this experience. Even people have gone to, more well-known, let's just say, pagan shops, this kind of thing. So they'll often say to me, I bought this thing, and it has lavender in it, and I don't know, a bird feather, whatever it has in it, doesn't matter. And nothing happened. So if I took those same items and I put them together, if they were the items I felt belonged to that desire, there would be a difference, because in that last moment, the energy of me deciding to lift those items and put them into each other's direct contact is where the battery is. Is that what you're saying, Chris?
Yes. I think we are the final, like I said, we are the final charge. We make everything work. Without us, like I said, you can put anything together, and that's a good example with the thing on the shelf. If you don't do anything with that, it's not going to work. I mean, you just have a bag of things.
The craziest version of that I ever saw was in Witchy Poostis kind of shop, and there was a general purpose gree bag. Morgan, are you cringing?
I'm doing a little more than cringing, but yeah, go on. I'm intrigued.
And I said to the woman at the counter, I said, "Ooh, tell me about that," because I couldn't ignore it. I said, "What is that for?" And she said, "Well, when you bring this home, it'll give you what you want, everything." I said, "How's that work?" "Well, you go home and you focus on this bag, and it'll bring you." I said, "Well, what if what I want, is to become a great and powerful sorceress and to become invisible?" That's what I said. And you hear crickets. Like, she looked at me and she said, "I don't think it can do that." That's what she said. And it really sort of
well, then it
away.
can't do everything.
I said to her, "Well, then I think you should change your sign." Yes, that's what I said, Chris. I think you should change your sign. It's not all purpose. So, I couldn't leave it alone. I said to her, "How do you sell this? Why do you sell this stuff? What is this about?" And these were her products. That's why I was so direct about it. I said, "You're asking people to come in here and give you their hard-earned money, and this is nonsense." She says, "No, it's not nonsense. The pink one is for love, and the red one is for passion." I said, "Let me guess. The green one is for money. The blue one is for clarity. The black one is if you're dealing with death. Should I go on?" And she said, "Oh, you know how to do this work?" And that was it. That was the end of the conversation for me. I had to walk away. But the all-purpose. I wanted to photograph it. I should have photographed the sign that said all-purpose gree bag. Go ahead, Morgan. I'm sorry I jumped in on you.
Oh, that's quite all right. For me, I just can't conceive of even making something like that and just stocking them ahead of time and then handing them to people. It has to be personal, and as Chris said, that's where we make it personal. We put our own bit of energy in, but I have to be able to work with the other person's energy for what they want. And I have seen people do this, though. I've actually seen bad practitioners who I thought maybe could teach me something, and I've learned the hard way that they couldn't. They would throw these things in the bag. They would throw the herbs in the bag. They would throw certain stones in the bag. They would throw holy metals in the bag. They would tie it up, and they would hand it to the client and say, "There you go. This is all you need." And I could feel there was absolutely no energy involved. I do, though, think that there are some things, such as biologicals, that do carry an innate energy. The thing is, can we contain it, can we focus it, and can we manipulate it in order to achieve the desired results? Because electricity has energy, but unless it's contained and focused through wires and through other implements, we don't get the light in the room. So that's how I look at it as. And going back to what I mentioned before, the raccoon penis bone, this is supposed to be carried for great good luck. Well, I think the raccoon who that came from would probably say that wasn't so much good luck for him. So,
Disagree.
So much for that. Symbolism is so easy to interpret on a personal level that I think that I really have to just feel the energy of a particular object out. And so I've whittled down the things that I consider to have innate energy, which I will use in these charms. I've whittled down these huge lists that voodoo practitioners have given me over the years to something that's more like about 10 things that I would say have innate energy, and the rest of it has to come from me. The rest of it, and also, again, the client has to get tangled in that energy, woven into that energy, and then has to basically take over that energy.
Take over that energy. I like that phrase. Let me say that for me, it's not so much that they take it over, because my clients are often people very verbal about just go do it. They just want it done. But they allow in the results. They came to me to perform a specific task. They don't want to be instructed on how to do sorcery. They just want to take over the results when they're working. So in that sense, it's the same kind of thing. They're taking over the work by taking in the results or allowing in the results. I want to talk a bit about grave dirt and about things that come from cemeteries and how that energy becomes valuable in the work of talismans. I mean, much of what I do is necromancy. In just about everything I do has some aspect of that, not maybe directly, but ultimately. So when we bring things from cemeteries, when we take grave dirt, what are we doing? What's happening here? And for me, it's, and I'll talk about that as we move on, but for me it's about having an item that comes from the Disincarnate's last visual impression of transition involving the people who took care of their burial, took care of their interment. And that is a very powerful transitional moment. When people use grave dirt in all kinds of things, and they have all sorts of intention for it, for me, when I use it, it's the energy of transition. So in everybody's work here, how much are you involved with materials that are related to death?
Well, with what I do, I'm pretty much dealing with the people that are dying at times. And when I use grave dirt, it's usually for something that I need a lot of energy, as far as maybe, I don't want to say love, because I don't do love spells, but that kind of feeling that you want to get, that compassion, that longing, things like that, because, that's what you have at a cemetery. I mean, that's basically, that's the last place that people see people, their loved ones and stuff, and there's a lot of compassion there. You also have a lot of grieving, which that works for other things, and we're not going to get into that. We won't go.
Yeah,
but
maybe that's not for a public show.
Yeah.
Although I have been known to push the envelope.
But you know what I mean. There's two different types of energy there that are very useful in the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, because if you break it down, we're either doing one of two things. We're either helping somebody or we're doing the other.
Right, we're bringing it or giving it back.
Right.
That's really how it works.
So that's it's cut and dry. That's simple. That's how you can use it. It's the most universal thing that we could use.
Well, in talismans for me, I use an enormous amount of these kinds of materials. Chips from headstones that have fallen off. I never chip headstones. I want to be really clear about that. I never break off pieces of headstone. I will collect chips of headstones if they are laying around. You find that more in ancient cemeteries or in older cemeteries, bits of stone that have flaked off. I often collect moss from headstones because anything that's actually grown attached to a headstone is relevant to me. Soil from the area, leaves, things that fall onto the grave. When I am in a cemetery, if a leaf has actually fallen onto the grave out of a tree while I'm there, this is an act of motion, and I will absolutely take that item for a transformation kind of piece that I might be doing for someone. Morgan, do you use a lot of cemetery materials or burial site materials?
Oh, yes, I do. And not all of it is strictly related to Southern Voodoo and Hoodoo, because in that practice, it's mostly considered to be used for hexing or causing problems for a person. And there are even some crazy things going around. I remember when I first read these things that I was totally blown away. People say, well, you can substitute things for graveyard dirt. You can substitute patchouli. And I'm thinking, why would I want to substitute patchouli? Yes, okay, if I want to summon a bunch of hippies, I'll use patchouli, but you typically don't want that particular outcome. So I do use it, though, to maintain a connection with the dead and to do so respectfully. One of the things that I do is when I go down to New Orleans, I always visit Marie Laveau's tomb. She's a spiritual ancestor for me, and there are usually small stones lying around, and I will usually pick one up and take that with me as a power object, and that's very meaningful to me. But even visiting cemeteries around the Atlanta area, I will occasionally scoop up some dirt, not always specifically from a grave, because I don't want people to think I'm despoiling the grave if there are other people around, but from a quiet area of the cemetery just for general energy, or if there is a specific person that did a specific act or several acts during life that I admire, I may surreptitiously take something from the grave that is not attached to the gravestone itself, but is on the grave, or some dirt from close by. I do this to maintain a connection with the dead, to show reverence for them, and that's how I typically use it. I don't ever use graveyard dirt in general for cursing or hexing. If I want to do a binding or if I want to do something to blast somebody, I will use other things. But I just don't like to get the dead involved with those things, because I would rather respect them and have a positive connection with them and a positive energy. If it was for self-defense, I might call on them to help me, but again, I wouldn't necessarily use I wouldn't use dirt from their grave to do it.
That's interesting, because I would tell them I'm going to do it or ask them. I have pretty much a policy that I, self-inflicted, self-followed, that when I use materials from a grave, it has to be a grave where the disincarnate have been willing to speak to me, and that I've had a real connection with for a moment at least. I don't like just taking soil from a grave and walking away, or picking up headstone chips and just walking away. That always feels impersonal. So I'll choose a grave that I want to use for whatever reason, whether it's the gender or the age or an experience that is attached to that person, and I will spend time communicating with them. I will not even necessarily take anything the first time I'm there. I'll walk away, we'll talk until I'm absolutely sure I have communication. That's when I take grave dirt, which is, I think, an unusual way to do things. I think most people who utilize grave dirt, and it's fine, it's just not my way, just take it from somewhere and begin to utilize it. But for me, I have to, it's like going to their house and borrowing something. I have to have their input, more so than I would with a client. I'll have more input with the Disincarnate and have a direct understanding or agreement from them that this is okay. Because I have been at cemeteries where I've stood over a grave and I say, this is what I'm looking for. It's a person of this age or whatever it is that is my particular inspiration. And I've had them look at me and just say, no, I don't want to be part of that. So if you're going to deal with grave dirt, necromancy is something you should really, really enhance. You should be able to be in communication. You don't go to someone's house and say, I like this, I'm going to take it with me. And the person's grave it definitely becomes a marker for a final communication or an important communication in their experience. So you should always be very, very careful about what you take from cemeteries and who you've asked, and I don't mean the caretaker. Morgan, do we have any questions in the chat room?
We do. We have one question from a listener who wants to know, what about using the energy of the way a person passed? Is that, and deciding to choose the graveyard, taking something from the grave based on that?
Yeah, that's what I was just sort of alluding to. When I deal with somebody who has a client, for example, who might have suicidal tendencies and has come to me to try and quelch that or find a way to deal with that, I will actually look for somebody who, and sometimes this takes research, somebody who has made that choice, somebody who has committed suicide. And now this seems anathema to the problem to do that. I understand that. But understand that for me, sorcery is not always the obvious choice. We talked about invisibility in class the other night, those of you who were there, and I said if you want to become invisible to someone, what you have to do is become so large that they cannot take you in with the scope of their vision. So this is the same kind of thing. If I have a client who is dealing with suicidal tendencies, I will find grave dirt from somebody who has taken their own life and made that choice, because that makes it real. They'll know what it is. They'll have an opening to understand perhaps the regrets or afterthoughts that this disincarnate had after making this choice, or between beginning the process of suicide and when it actually takes over, by which I mean what happens on the way down if someone jumps, this kind of thing. So there's an enormous amount of reality that comes through. Talismans are not always preventative. Sometimes they're there to open one's eyes. When I have people who need an awakening of some kind by their own desire to have it, their own coming to me to ask for a way to create that. It's not up to me to decide that for clients. They decide for themselves. And I'll use grave dirt of a particular type of person who's had that exact experience. There is one grave in Greenwood Cemetery that's in Brooklyn, New York, that when I'm there, I go and utilize. And it's one of a particular, let's just say somebody who died in the process of a ceremony. I don't want to talk about her on the air because I don't have her permission to do so. But she died during during a process, and during a ceremony rather, and that ceremony is sort of obvious when you see the gravestone, how she died and when she died. So I use her grave dirt with her permission on occasion to help people finish a process, because she knows what it's like to not finish a process, to be forced into stopping in the middle. And so for me, often actually when I use grave dirt, talismans reflect what needs to happen. They show what a stopping point looks like, and therefore allows the client to go past the stopping point. I think that answers the question. Yes?
Yeah,
Morgan?
I think it does, definitely. Yes, definitely, I think it does. And I want to add a follow-up question, because we are talking about using things from people who are now deceased and disincarnate. And we've talked about relics before on the show, so I want to briefly touch on that again, because certainly I think relics are an ideal example of a talisman, of pieces of deceased person's body or bits of their blood. What do you think about using these in larger ceremonies for, say, a communal group? Is it possible for a talisman to be effective in a communal setting as opposed to the one-on-one settings that we've been talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I am often called upon to do a talisman for a group, sometimes for a family, sometimes for an event. There's a family that called upon me quite some time ago where everyone in the family had a genetic link to the same disease or the same potential disease, and they spent their lives waiting for the other shoe to fall. So we worked on talismans one talisman for the entire family, because the power, and this is the interesting answer to this question, the power in that group was the fact that everyone had the potential to experience the outcome they didn't want. When 5 or 6 people are standing around all trying not to fall off the cliff, the energy of holding on is very powerful. And that's how I would create a talisman based on that energy for a group. You know, I did a talisman for a political campaign once. I've actually been asked to do a lot of them. I don't do them that often. But one time I did, and that was essentially for a group as well, because it was an individual and their running mate and this sort of thing, and all of the people involved in that who had come together to ask me for assistance in this way. Absolutely. A talisman is connected to an energy. It says, do this thing. I put X, Y, and Z together, and with my thoughts, intentions, and ideas, and my experience, my vast skill in this area, I say, your job now, talisman, is to do this thing. The talisman does not always need to know for how many people. It needs to know that it has to do this thing. And if the thing it has to do, for example, is eradicate the ongoing presence of a disease in a particular genetic combination, then it will do that. And it will, if it's doing that for 5 or 6 people, it'll do it for 5 or 6 people. So yes, absolutely, there are cases in which a talisman is addressing a larger group of people, not just one person. How about we take another question, and then I go to the thing I want to do with the penny. Is there another question?
Yes, there is. Darren had a great question. He always has great questions. And
he certainly does.
He wanted to know, what about using remnants from other sorcery events to create a new talisman? Mm-hmm.
2 things to say about that, yes and no. And the yes is that there are items that are further empowered by having been, or further energized by having been in one activity, so that when you bring them to the next activity, they have essentially, you know, more energy or more juice of the thing. I do this with fertility talismans. I've made a number of fertility talismans over all these decades of years of work of this thing. There are 3 that I have that are ongoing. They have each been released by the individual they have been used on to move on to what's next. And in that release, they are releasing them because success has happened. If somebody's trying to conceive and they can't do it, and they have a talisman, and the talisman aids them in the experience of conceiving, when their child is born, they let go of the talisman, and they let go of it with this sense of like a sigh of relief, and that sigh of relief is success. So I do bring those whole talismans in entirety forward. That is more useful than dismantling talismans and using the pieces of them, again, because they have, as you have created a talisman, you've created a memory. And they carry with them a library of what they've done. If you've used an aviary bone, and I use that example because it's a clear one to understand, to help one person escape, and they have escaped and they're gone, and you take that bone and you use it again, it really loses, it'll take away from the next talisman in some cases, because it has represented a complete escape that's now forward-moving and ongoing. So you have to be very careful about the materials, what you've used them for, so that when you repeat using them, if what they were supposed to have done was a finite thing, then they're done. And, you know, that talisman needs to be burned or buried or in some way allowed to, I guess, expand and disappear. Victor, we haven't heard from you for a while. You have any thoughts?
I just had a follow-up question. You had mentioned that when you go to a cemetery, you ask permission of the disincarnate before taking anything from the grave site. Do you also do that in nature? In other words, if you wanted a specific plant or a leaf or a flower or something else that you use in the making of a talisman, do you ask permission in that setting?
Some do, I don't.
Okay.
I'm really black and white about the way that I feel about things. I understand that plants are a living thing. I don't understand that they have an intellect, so I don't have that kind of communication with them. A long time ago, somebody said to me, when you want to deal with something, deal with it on the level it exists on. Walk right up to it and be where it is. And it was actually somebody who was studying autism who told me this. And he was talking about how he deals with his clients. You know, he never expects more or less. He walks up to them where they are. A plant and I have no exchange intellectually. So when I walk up to a plant, what I see is something I either eat or stick in a vase or something like that. So I enter it with my understanding of what it is. When I take things from the earth that are not grave-related, I take them and I just use them because to me, being on the earth is being part of it. It is as much as using its biologicals and using my biologicals, it's the same thing. But because there is not a disincarnate involved, I don't. I mean, I know some do. So I'm not somebody who I have a great understanding of what we get from living on this earth and the strength of the polarities. I'm not somebody who has a reverence for nature in the way that many other people do, and that might be surprising or upsetting to people, but that's just the way I am. I'm not, I don't address trees as beautiful living things. I address them as trees. It's the way that I feel towards them, and I do appreciate that others do.
Thank you for sharing that. You had mentioned Greenwood Cemetery. Actually, I used to live on the northern perimeter of Greenwood Cemetery when I lived in Brooklyn. And for our listeners, if you ever have an opportunity to be in central Brooklyn, in that area between Flatbush and Borough Park, and Bay Ridge, visit the cemetery. They actually have guided tours because there are some amazing monuments in that cemetery.
Especially this time of year. This time of year, you can go underground. You can go into the holding areas. You can go into the very old niches where the cremains used to be kept. In some times of the year, you can go into the holding rooms that are used when the ground freezes up and there cannot be burials because they can't open the ground. You know, having grown up in New York City, I say all the time, you cannot be a necromancer if you haven't been to Greenwood Cemetery. And of course, I don't absolutely mean that, but the place is the true sense of the Walking Dead. If you're in there and you don't feel or see something, then I don't know if you ever will. It has such a magnificence. I always feel that if you're going to be a necromancer, if necromancy is an important part of your life, there are places you must go, power of place. You must go to Greenwood. You must go to find cemeteries that are crumbling into the dust and communicate in those ways because those are people who are been forgotten. And you must go to Greyfriars in Scotland and stand in there and be in the presence of that because the history there of people's fear of the dead and this idea that people, the dead could escape and vampirism and that whole essence of how people handled their fears and their confusions happened both in Greenwood Cemetery in the sense of the Victorian way of death and what death was and is and does it exist and when does it happen, going all the way to the other end of the spectrum and going into Greyfriars where the thought was so powerful that yes, it absolutely can happen and the dead can rise, so we're going to do things like put iron bars and keep them in the ground. So these are places, power of place, one must go to if one wants to do this work. Not to get off topic, I did ask people tonight to get a penny, and I don't know if this group has one, but I want to spend a minute talking about the energy of physicality. Last week we did harvesting, and Victor, incredibly grateful for your participation in that, and I got a lot of emails, people talking about how moved they were by that experience. And those of you who listen to the radio show all the time, I want to say I've got a lot of emails from people about that, and I will answer them because this is really important to me, about people's experience through our harvesting. And I will share those emails without names with the group, with the on-air group. And if anybody I might even send some emails back and say, can I talk about this without using your name on the air? because people had enormous reactions to the harvestings, all powerful and all useful. So I want to talk about that. But tonight I want to, and I'm starting to do it now as we talk, I'm going to put my energy into the penny that everybody listening to this is holding. And the interesting thing about this particular effort that I'm making right now is that if you're listening to this in archive, it will be just as useful. I have in my mind and in my thoughts, intentions, and ideas the understanding of the structure of what a penny is. So if I'm holding that penny in my mind in this way, and I don't mean, like I say all the time, in the way that people deal with power of positive thinking. I'm not talking about that. I'm not even talking about imagery. I'm not talking about, a wish board. I'm talking about holding the image in my mind in the way that a person who has practiced sorcery for decades can do, and that many other practitioners of many paths can do. I'm actually holding that penny in my mind. I have it solid. I can feel it. I understand the sensation of how it would be if I was touching it with my hands. I understand the weight. I'm looking at it as if I'm actually spending it, holding it, touching it, sorting through and really being very tactile with it. And as I'm doing this, I'm putting the energy into the penny everybody is holding while listening to this. And if you listen to this in archive, like I said, it will work just as well, because the power of the words is putting the energy out there. And I suggest in this effort that the penny that you are holding holds with it an energy that allows you to break a habit and move forward. And this is, every week on this show I want to do one of these things where I do make an effort and make an energy exchange. And right now, if you're holding that penny, first it's going to go cold. I'm going to let it go cold so that it becomes neutral. And that's going to happen as you hold it in your hand in any way that you want to hold it. There's no right or wrong way. And then as we talk, as I say these next few words, the penny will start to go warm, and you will now be enacting an energy exchange with this penny and having an experience where you become part of the energy of this penny and how it communicates with its physical surroundings. So while I do that, take a moment to understand with your thoughts, ideas, and intentions that what I'm doing is giving you a talisman, an actual physical talisman in this penny that you've brought to the game tonight. And by game, I mean this experience where we're all working together and having an effort and an energy that we're sharing. And taking this penny and allowing you to understand and connect to and be part of this energy where you can use this penny to break a habit. How do you use it? You have it. You address the habit. You address the energy in the penny, and you let the penny make the reverse exchange. And I don't know what people are feeling during that, but I'm certainly feeling it here, and I'm sure that I will get texts and messages and emails on it. Now, a penny has copper in it. It has a particular kind of energy, a particular kind of metal. You might find that working with this penny right now and moving forward as you carry it, that you feel a little bit dizzy, a little bit of a pressure on your frontal lobe, right above your eyes, in your head, as I send out this energy and touch all of these pennies with the same contact that I'm touching the one in my mind with. I don't have a penny in my hand. The reason I don't have a penny in my hand is if I had a penny in my hand, I would be enacting energy on that item. I'm enacting energy on all of the pennies that everyone's holding by this work. So I let that go and let that be out there. And those of you who are participating might feel a little dizzy, or you might feel like one part of your body is shifting one way and another part is shifting another way. This is a common experience in a talismanic energy exchange like this one, where you're providing the talisman and I'm providing the enactment of the energy. You might feel heaviness above your eyes, and I suggest everyone take that, allow it to go into the penny, and hold on to that. I suggest everyone who's participating in this keep data on how they use it over the next few days. Send emails. I'm sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com, but we'll go over that at the end of the show. I'm talking fast because the energy goes fast. This is how this works. So I'm going to leave that at that. Let it go. Set it out there. Everyone take a breath. And it's released. Anybody on the show want to talk about that? Make a comment?
Well, before you said the word cold, It felt cold. Just before you said it, it was so. Even before you enunciated it, just the intention and the thought, the energy you were sending out, it happened. So.
Well, Victor, I've done this kind of work before.
I know.
No, I appreciate that, and I try to, keep a certain lightness of matter in the subject that we're talking about, because that's how one best absorbs things, by pleasure and by an open portal. But I appreciate you saying that, and that's the kind of validation that is helpful to me too, because if it didn't, then I would need to know that I have to adjust my technique, and I'm always open to that. Never ever will I be shut down or unwilling to make changes where they are necessary. But it
also shows the power, because just by suggestion you could say to somebody that's going to feel cold, and when you hear the word cold, by suggestion it could happen. Mm-hmm. It happened before you enunciated the word. Which
because I felt it. I felt it getting cold in my head, in my mind. So yes, thank you for that. That's actually very helpful to me. That means that the direction I went with this tonight was a useful one and is working.
Thank you.
Sure. Hold on to that penny. Anybody else? Morgan, Chris, you have thoughts on the experience we just had here on the radio?
Yeah, I actually felt it. I did feel it get cold and slightly warm, but what more I focused on, I was holding it flat in my open palm, and I could actually feel it vibrating. I could feel it pulsing coming from it, and radiating out from it in a circular sort of energy field. And we are getting comments from the chat room too, that other people have felt the penny get cold and felt it buzzing, vibrating, and definitely felt some interaction with this energy that you were sending out.
Great. That's the point of the work. The point of the work is to make it available. That's how I'm going to give all my secrets away. I am going to do that. That is my intention, is to make the work available. And I say over and over, if I share it with everybody else, I don't get worse at it. I get better at it. And that is the desire, is for those who can use it, those who do want to use it, to be part of it. Thank you for that, Morgan. That's actually very helpful to me, too, because it means that the technique is honed and is working well. And I felt that it was really connecting while I was doing it. Chris, what do you think about this?
I have to concur with everybody else as far as what they felt. I really don't have a whole lot to add to it. I mean, we all pretty much felt the same thing.
Well, this is what talismans are supposed to do, and this is why I wanted to, do most of the show first, and then show some sort of provable outcome, because if you cannot prove the work that you do is not sorcery; it's conjecture. And that is a very controversial thing to say. If you can't step forward and make it work, then it's a lovely idea. But for me, the idea of sorcery in general means I have to present something and make it work. Somebody calls me in need of a critical healing, their back's out, they don't feel well, whatever's going on, I have to fix it. If I say I'm going to fix it, it must be fixed. Not in 6 weeks, not after 3 rounds of physical therapy, that night or that day, on time, and in real time while I'm working on their case. This is what sorcery is. It's real time. And real time sometimes has to be bent a little bit. Sometimes real time means that in that moment I've ignited it, and now it takes its natural progression. Sometimes things take time to grow or happen. And that's what I mean by real time. If, I mentioned fertility tonight a lot because I do a lot of fertility talismans. If somebody comes to me for fertility, they will not be pregnant during the session. They will be available to become pregnant during the session. And then when they interact with the materials necessary, they will become pregnant. That's how it works. So that's what real time is. Real time is appropriate time. But it was important tonight to show the listening audience what a talisman feels like. And here's my reason, and going back to what Morgan was saying, what Chris was saying about the right materials have to be in there. The right materials are the right materials for the job. There is no great recipe book. There are many, many books written as recipe books, and there are many books written with rituals in it. My own books have rituals in them. And rituals are a suggestion from the author when done correctly. They are a suggestion from the author reporting data as we've seen it happen. With talismans, if you don't feel something, it's not connected to you. And you may feel a myriad of things. You might feel wellness, you might feel dizzy, you might feel illness, you might feel wind, you might feel change, you might feel an emotion. But you have to feel something, because that's what a talisman does. The point of a talisman is to knock you off your chair. It's supposed to make you sit up and look and listen and know something is different. Something has happened. Victor, you mentioned, or I think it was you who mentioned earlier, relics, was it? I don't know. Was it Victor? We were talking about relics once on another show, and about how I had been in the Church of John the Baptist in New York, and Padre Pio's relics were there, and those are talismans. They are not just relics. They are not even the ones that are first class relics. They're talismans, because they are not any longer about the representation of the individual so much, as they bring with them a vibrational sense, something about them that's changing who you are when you look at them. A talisman, unlike a sigil, has the effect of, it changes something about who you are in the moment of the experience desired, when you touch it, when you grab it, when you hold it, when you interact with it. A sigil is built, and I'm making this distinction because people ask me this question all the time. A sigil is built so that you can look at it and change something in you that you're taking in and be triggered by it. A talisman is a tool in a different way. It has to take that energy in and of itself, like the penny did in your hands at a distance where I wasn't even looking at anyone. And you have to have a physical response in some way, which is why gree bags are so great when they're well done. They have, a real sense of, you hold them in your hand and there's something there. Why Chris's work with rune stabs and this sort of thing is so powerful, because you hold it in your hand and there's something there. And as people who perform sorcery, and especially the science of sorcery, where you become sort of removed from the idea of tools, it's important to know that the tools that we build in the moment are useful and necessary and vital, and can work at this sort of intense way, just like the penny did. Anybody have anything they want to add? Because I think I'm actually going to be off the air a few minutes early tonight. I have someone I need to talk to at 11. So let's do a round of comments. Victor, you have any thoughts you want to add?
This was an amazing experience tonight. Thank you for that. The power of what you transmitted was fabulous, and I think that this is something I have never created a talisman myself, and I think it's something that I'm now very inspired to do.
Well, thank you for that, because what I want to do is, going forward, do one of these kinds of sort of miniature sorcery and real-time events in each show. And I think this is what, I'm really on a path to be set apart, and by set apart I mean somebody who doesn't just write books, somebody who really does the work that they write about. And I think that when you do things like this in real time, people get a chance to understand that the work is valid and real, and they can participate in it even sort of anonymously. When one reads a book, one's participating anonymously. Well, this is the next level of that, and something I'm really excited about doing going forward. So thank you for that, Victor. I appreciate that. Morgan, do you have any thoughts, Morgan? Things you want to add?
Yeah, I do. I think that for me, this has been another incredible learning experience. I come onto the show partially to share what I have learned over the years, but I always feel I walk away from these shows having learned much, much more. So it's an incredible opportunity for me to be working with this. And it's given me it's always nice to hear different people's perspectives on areas where I've worked in for a number of years, because I feel that no matter how much I've done, no matter how experienced I am, I can still learn a hell of a lot more, and I never fail to be disappointed with these shows.
Thank you for that, Morgan. Don't you find that when you talk about the work, even if you're teaching the work, some light bulbs always go on, like things that you haven't thought about? I find that even when I'm teaching my Wednesday night core classes, that sometimes I'll be talking about something that I've written down or that I wanted to remember to say, and when I'm talking about it, it lights up another direction. Do you have that experience?
I do. It seems that when people are converging and there is always this energy with more than one person in the room, and it's not just my own thoughts, it's almost like there are more neural connections opening up in my brain.
I love this word, neural connections. It's so much what's happening here. That's so exactly on. Chris, thoughts on talismans?
I think that with talismans, it gives people something that they can believe in. You know what I mean? So much of this work that we do behind the scenes that nobody sees, this just gives them something that they can put some kind of faith into.
Tangibility.
Right. It gives it, you know, like here, I have something that's going to make it, that this is going to work. You know, I think people need that. I mean, very few people have the faith to go on what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what they need as far as a talisman goes.
I think you're right.
That's what makes it work so well, is that the people believe in it. You know, you put your energy into it, and you put it together, but they make it, you know, they help make it work. You know, it's the connection to them and their faith that helps.
Like I said before, for me, the word believe is always a quirky thing, but at least what they have to be willing to do is experience the success. This is what I say to people. Here's the talisman. Now go experience the success. And I don't ask them to do anything other than that if they're not students of sorcery. And sometimes being students of sorcery stops them a little bit from experiencing the success because they want to add their thing to it. A talisman is a closed sentence. It comes to the end and there's a big period at the end, or a full stop as you call it in the UK. I wrote this story. Here it is. Hold on to it and you have it now. That's what a talisman is. This is what makes it different from other kinds of work, from sigil work and from pillar work and all the other things that we do. But a talisman is, I made this for you and now go have the success. When you make talismans, and I say this to the listening audience, when you make a talisman, if you look at it before you hand it off, you cannot say to yourself, this is a whole story, then it's not done. You know, what goes into a talisman? Here's the answer to that. It's a very specific answer. Everything you need. That's what goes into a talisman. Before you hand it off, you look at it and you say, is there everything in here that I need to tell the whole story and to make the event one that will occur in the parameters of the desire of the individual for whom it is aimed or handed to? It has to be a complete story. That's what a talisman is, whether it's one ingredient, whether it's a penny in your hand, whether it's 35 ingredients, whatever it is. Every ingredient has to come together to tell the full story, full stop. And that's how you define a successful talisman. Let's do just one more round telling people how to find us. Victor, you want to start?
On Facebook, I'm Victor the Voice Furman, Fuhrman.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank
Morgan?
You.
Yes, I can be reached by my Hotmail address, morgansaintknight@hotmail.com, and there is no period after the Saint in Saint Knight.
Thank you, Morgan. Chris?
And you can get me on Facebook at my Hell's Rogue, HEL' site, or by email at hellsrogue, HELSrogue, @gmail.com.
You know, I've pulled a bit away from Facebook because of recent activities, which I will not acknowledge and support by talking about very much. But what I say, the reason that I want to do this is there are going to be plenty of other ways to reach me. I'm on Google Plus now as Sorceress Cagliastro. It's pretty simple to remember. But I want to really focus on offering people ways to access me and my work through my website, which is cagliastrotheironring.com. Cagliastrotheironring, just like that. One big fat word. My email address is sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. Keeping it really simple. We have a great website that Morgan has put together for the show. Morgan, what's the URL?
The URL is Dark Matters Radio Cagliastro, all one word, .com.
So go there if you want to see what's happening next. I have a link to it on my website. Again, the website is cagliastrotheironring.com, and feel free to look at all the stuff I have on there and all the different descriptions that offer a clue as to what it is that I do. And feel free to contact me on Google Plus as I move away from Facebook over the next week or so, as it takes a little time when you're dealing with 4,500 people. So on that note, I am the Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress Necromancer in the Hands of Nine. I'm honored to be part of this work, and very grateful to listeners who want to share the work and learn about the work through this medium. I want to thank Victor and Morgan and Chris, and